A blood-red gavel lies shattered on the courthouse steps, fragments scattered like a broken promise. The symbol of justice, destroyed in the very place meant to uphold it. Federal Judge Omer Jackson stares at it in disbelief, his reflection fractured in the jagged pieces. Moments earlier, his chambers were sealed by armed guards, his staff scattered in fear, and whispers of conspiracy began swirling in the corridors of power. Who would dare threaten the life of a judge? And what truth could be so dangerous it needs to be silenced forever? Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton. The morning sun broke through the glass towers of Metropolis like an artist streaking light across a blank canvas. Below, the streets buzzed with the faint hum of awakening life. Cars inching through congested intersections, street vendors setting up their carts, and joggers weaving between pedestrians on sidewalks, still glistening from the night's rain. The city was alive, but Ana Cortez barely noticed. Ana adjusted the strap of her leather satchel on her shoulder, glancing at her smartwatch as she walked briskly from the parking lot toward the courthouse. She could see her breath in the cold, a reminder that spring hadn't yet fully replaced winter's chill. For most people, Metropolis was a place of dreams, its glittering skyline a symbol of hope. For Ana, it was both battlefield and prize. The city's labyrinthine justice system had been her domain for nearly 5 years now, a system she had fought her entire life to master. Her courtroom awaited her today, as it did every day, a fortress of order where her words carried the weight of finality. Yet, for all her precision and planning, something had gone terribly awry this morning. She hadn't even made it through the courthouse doors when her world began to unravel. Ana stopped abruptly in the parking lot, just steps from her sleek electric sedan. Her hand instinctively patted the side of her blazer and then dipped into the outer pocket of her satchel. Nothing. A flicker of worry crossed her face, quickly replaced by a practiced calm. "Not now," she muttered under her breath, setting the satchel on the hood of her car. The courthouse loomed in the distance, a hulking granite structure with columns that seemed to reach for the sky. She was supposed to be inside that building, not rummaging through papers and loose odds and ends. Her satchel yielded no answers, just her work laptop, a jumble of pens, and an old notepad she'd meant to replace weeks ago. Ana let out a breath through her nose, sharp and controlled, as she turned back to the car. The purse had to be here, it always was. She leaned inside, the scent of leather and air freshener greeting her as she began rifling through the front seat. Time slowed. The clock on the dashboard blinked at her, an unspoken reminder that every minute spent searching was a minute closer to chaos. The faint growl of an engine pulled her from her thoughts. She straightened, turning toward the source of the sound. A black and white police cruiser rolled into the lot, its presence sudden and unsettling. The tires crunched softly over the wet asphalt as the car slowed to a crawl, the driver's gaze fixed squarely on her. Ana felt the prickle of unease before she fully processed what was happening. She had no reason to fear the police. Her life was built on the foundation of the law, and her role in the justice system made her an ally, not an adversary. And yet, the cruiser's slow, deliberate approach filled her with a sense of foreboding. The car stopped several feet away. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a uniform that clung to him like a second skin. His belt gleamed under the pale morning light, its weight emphasized by the holstered firearm resting on his hip. His eyes, sharp and assessing, locked onto Ana like a predator sizing up its prey. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice a bark that cut through the quiet lot. Ana blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She straightened, brushing invisible dust from her blazer. "Good morning, officer," she said, her voice steady but polite. "I'm looking for my purse. It seems to have fallen somewhere in my car." The officer's gaze swept over her, taking in the tailored suit, the neat bun in her dark hair, and the slight flush on her cheeks from the cold. His expression remained impassive, but Ana caught the faintest flicker of something. Doubt? Suspicion? It was gone before she could name it. "This your car?" he asked. "Yes." "Got ID on you?" The question made her pause. Of course she didn't. Her ID was in the missing purse. But explaining that to him felt like stepping onto a precarious ledge. "My ID is in my purse," she said, gesturing toward the open door of the car. "That's why I'm looking for it. If you'd like, you can run the plates. They'll confirm." "Step away from the vehicle," he said, cutting her off. Ana frowned, a flicker of irritation flashing in her dark eyes. She'd dealt with her fair share of dismissive men in her career, Lawyers, judges, politicians who thought her place in the courtroom was an anomaly rather than a testament to her skill. But this man didn't know who she was, and he wasn't listening. "Officer," she began, her tone firm but not confrontational. "I'm Judge Ana Cortez. I have a docket full of cases waiting for me today. If you'd just let me." "Judge, huh?" The corner of his mouth twitched upward in a smirk. "That's a new one." Ana felt the ground shift beneath her, though she remained still. She could feel the conversation slipping out of her control, spiraling into a place where logic and reason wouldn't matter. The officer, Detective Harris, according to his nameplate, crossed his arms over his broad chest, his posture radiating authority. "Look, lady," he said, his tone dropping an octave. "I don't know who you think you're fooling, but I've seen this act before. Fancy words, big claims, but out here, actions speak louder." The words hit harder than they should have. Ana had spent years crafting an image of perfection, flawless in every aspect of her work, untouchable in her composure. And yet here she was, being spoken to as though she were an imposter in her own skin. "This isn't an act," she said, her voice sharper now. "This is my car, and I'm late for court. If you just—" "Hands where I can see them," Harris barked. The shift was so abrupt, so shocking, that Ana froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was saying. "What?" "You heard me. Hands up. Step away from the vehicle." The tension in his voice left no room for argument. Slowly, Ana raised her hands, palms outward, as if surrendering in a courtroom battle she hadn't seen coming. Ana stood still, her hands raised above her shoulders, as though the weight of the entire city pressed down on them. Her pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the distant wail of a siren or the soft murmurs of others in the parking lot who were now watching. The courthouse steps, only a stone's throw away, seemed impossibly distant. Detective Harris didn't move closer immediately. He stood there, assessing her with an unflinching gaze. The way he shifted his weight onto one leg, hand resting on his belt, made Ana feel as if she were a defendant awaiting a verdict. A flicker of anger began to kindle in her chest. Anger at him for his assumptions, at the situation for its absurdity, and at herself for not asserting her position more forcefully earlier. She was Judge Ana Cortez, not some nameless, faceless bystander. "Officer," she said, her voice trembling only slightly, "there's no need for this. If you just listen—" "Not another word," Harris interrupted, pulling out a pair of handcuffs with a metallic clink that reverberated like a gunshot in Anna's ears. Her breath hitched. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is a mistake." "Then we'll clear it up at the station," he said, his smirk returning. "Turn around." Ana froze. Her instincts screamed at her to resist, to explain, to demand that he call his sergeant and check her credentials. But logic kept her in place. Resisting would only escalate the situation, and she wasn't about to give him an excuse to wield more authority over her. She turned slowly, her hands still raised. Harris stepped closer, the cuffs cold and unyielding as he snapped them onto her wrists. The sensation was foreign, alien. Ana had seen countless people in cuffs, defendants led into her courtroom, heads bowed, resigned to their fate. Now she understood the humiliation, the sharp sting of metal against skin. She turned her head slightly, glancing at the younger officer who had arrived as backup. His badge read Daniels. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between her and Harris, as though questioning the necessity of the arrest. But he said nothing. "I'm a judge," Ana said again, directing her words to Daniels now. "This is a mistake, and you know it." Daniels's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't reply. The cruiser's back seat was cramped, the vinyl cold against Ana's legs. Her wrists throbbed against the tight cuffs, but it was her pride that hurt the most. She kept her chin raised, refusing to let her composure slip, even as Harris climbed into the front seat. As the car pulled away from the parking lot, Ana's mind raced. How had this spiraled so quickly? The purse, the cursed missing purse, had been the trigger. But Harris's demeanor suggested this was about more than a misunderstanding. He had dismissed her credentials outright, his tone dripping with condescension. Her thoughts shifted to her mother. What would she say if she could see me now? Her mother, a nurse who had worked double shifts to make ends meet, had always been her fiercest supporter. "They'll try to put you in your place, Ana," her mother had said once, after a particularly grueling argument with a landlord who had raised their rent without notice. "Your job is to show them your place is wherever you choose." Ana had taken those words to heart. Every step she had taken, from earning a scholarship to law school to becoming the youngest federal judge in her district, had been fueled by a desire to prove her worth, to show that her place was not dictated by others. But here, in the back of a police cruiser, she felt the weight of her mother's warning. Despite her success, her title, her unassailable record, she was still seen as an outsider by men like Harris. The precinct was a gray monolith, its exterior as unwelcoming as the people inside it. Harris escorted Ana through the double doors, the clinking of her cuffs drawing curious glances from officers milling about the lobby. Most of them didn't recognize her, or if they did, they didn't let it show. The holding area was small, a box of concrete and steel that seemed to shrink the longer Ana sat in it. Harris didn't bother uncuffing her as he pushed her into the hard plastic chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above her, casting an unnatural pallor over everything. "I'll run her prints," Harris said, addressing a nearby officer as though Ana weren't even in the room. "Let's see if she's got anything outstanding." Ana's jaw tightened. "This is a waste of time," she said, her voice sharp. "Check the plates on the car. You'll see it's registered to me." Harris didn't respond. He sauntered out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The silence was oppressive. Ana stared at the small window on the door, watching as officers moved past without a glance. She thought of her courtroom, the cases piling up in her absence. How long before someone notices I'm not there? The thought was both comforting and infuriating. Would they think she was shirking her duties? Or would someone connect the dots and come looking for her? She shifted uncomfortably, the cuffs biting into her skin. It was an indignity she wouldn't soon forget. When Harris returned an hour later, his expression was unreadable. He tossed a phone onto the table in front of her, its screen dark. "Your call," he said flatly. Ana leaned forward, the cuffs making the movement awkward. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number she knew by heart. Marcus Vance. A name that carried as much weight in legal circles as her own. More than a friend, Marcus was her fiercest ally and occasional sparring partner. She trusted him implicitly. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Ana?" His voice was sharp, concerned. "I'm at the precinct," she said, keeping her voice low. "They've arrested me." "What?" Marcus's disbelief was palpable. "For what?" "They think I stole my car," she said, bitterness creeping into her tone. The line went silent for a moment, then Marcus's voice returned, low and dangerous. "I'm on my way." Ana hung up and leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the ordeal had begun, a flicker of hope broke through the storm cloud of her thoughts. Marcus would come, and when he did, the system that had momentarily trapped her would feel the full weight of his wrath. The sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the precinct signaled Marcus's arrival before Ana saw him. The moment he appeared in the doorway, his presence commanded attention. Tall and wiry, with an intensity that seemed to radiate from him, Marcus Vance was not a man to be ignored. His tailored suit, immaculately pressed, contrasted sharply with the grimy precinct walls. His sharp jawline was set, and his dark eyes burned with a fury he barely contained. He strode into the room where Ana sat, taking in her cuffed wrists and the defiance in her gaze. "Detective Harris," Marcus said, his voice a blade slicing through the tension in the room. "You've made a grave mistake." Harris was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, smirking as if Marcus's indignation amused him. "That so?" Marcus took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You've arrested a federal judge without probable cause. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" "She had no ID, no proof the car was hers," Harris said, shrugging. "Looks suspicious to me." "That car," Marcus said, his tone icy, "is registered to Judge Ana Cortez. A 2-minute check of the plates would have told you that. But you didn't bother, did you?" Harris's smirk faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Marcus turned to the sergeant standing nearby, who had been silently observing the exchange. "Run the plates, now." The sergeant hesitated, then nodded toward a nearby officer. Within minutes, the truth was laid bare. The car was indeed registered to Ana Cortez. The name flashed on the screen, undeniable and damning. Harris's expression darkened, but he said nothing. The cuffs were removed, the cold metal replaced by the warmth of Marcus's steady hand on Ana's shoulder. She stood, brushing herself off, her composure intact despite the humiliation of the past few hours. The sergeant stepped forward, his face lined with weariness. "Judge Cortez, on behalf of the department, I apologize for this misunderstanding." Ana's gaze was sharp. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a failure. A failure to follow protocol. A failure to see me as anything other than what you assumed. The sergeant's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll handle it internally. Ana laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the small room. Internally, that's convenient. Marcus stepped in, his voice calm but menacing. This isn't over. There will be formal complaints, investigations, and consequences. You'll hear from us soon. As Ana and Marcus walked out of the precinct, the morning sun was brighter, harsher, as if mocking the ordeal she had just endured. She glanced at Marcus, her voice quiet. They didn't see me as a judge, Marcus. They didn't even see me as a person. Marcus's jaw tightened. We're going to make sure they regret it. The story broke within hours. Marcus wasted no time contacting the press, framing the narrative with precision. Federal judge wrongfully arrested by police, the headlines read. Ana's photo, taken from her professional profile, was plastered across every major news outlet. Ana sat in her apartment, her phone buzzing constantly with calls and messages. Some were from colleagues offering support, others from reporters hungry for details. She ignored most of them, her focus on the statement she was preparing. This isn't about me, she wrote, her fingers flying across the keyboard. This is about a system that allows assumptions to dictate actions, a system that fails the very people it's meant to protect. She paused, her thoughts drifting back to the moment Harris had dismissed her credentials. The memory was a thorn in her side, sharp and persistent. She couldn't let it go, not just for her own sake, but for everyone who had experienced the same injustice without the platform to fight back. Marcus called later that evening. The complaints have been filed. Harris and his precinct are under scrutiny now. Ana sighed. It's a start. It's more than that, Marcus said. You've ignited something. People are paying attention. The first crack in the precinct's defenses came from an unexpected source, Officer Daniels. The younger officer, who had remained silent during Ana's arrest, reached out to Marcus a week later. They met in a nondescript coffee shop on the edge of the city, Daniels's unease evident in the way he fidgeted with his coffee cup. I knew it wasn't right, Daniels said, his voice low. What Harris did. He's done it before, to others. It's just no one ever fights back. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze steady. Why are you coming forward now? Daniels hesitated, then glanced around the room as if expecting someone to be watching. Because it's gone too far. Someone has to say something. Daniels provided more than just testimony. He handed over a flash drive containing files that exposed a pattern of misconduct within the precinct. Arrests made without cause, reports falsified to justify excessive force, and complaints that had mysteriously disappeared from the system. Marcus took the flash drive with a grim nod. You're doing the right thing. Daniels smiled faintly. I hope so. The evidence Daniels provided was a bombshell. Marcus and Ana used it to build a case that went beyond her wrongful arrest. They uncovered a culture of corruption that reached deep into the precinct's leadership. Ana stood at the center of the storm, her voice steady and unwavering as she addressed the media. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that protects itself at the expense of justice. That ends now. Protests erupted across the city, fueled by anger and frustration that had been simmering for years. Ana became a symbol of resistance, her story a rallying cry for those who had long felt invisible. But with visibility came danger. Anonymous threats began to flood her inbox, emails filled with vitriol, letters slid under her office door late at night. One evening, as she walked to her car, she noticed a figure lingering in the shadows. When she called out, they disappeared, but the sense of unease lingered. Marcus insisted on hiring security, but Ana resisted at first. I won't let fear control me, she said. This isn't about fear, Marcus replied. It's about being smart. You're a threat to them now. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension, as Ana and Marcus presented their case against the precinct. Harris sat at the defendant's table, his smirk replaced by a scowl. Daniels testified, his voice shaking but resolute, as he recounted the events of Ana's arrest and the culture of corruption he had witnessed. When it was Ana's turn to speak, she stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the room. This is about accountability, she said, about ensuring that no one, no matter their title, their background, or their position, is above the law. The jury's verdict was swift, guilty. Harris was stripped of his badge, and the precinct faced a complete overhaul. It was a victory, but Ana knew it was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Ana became a national figure, her story sparking conversations about systemic bias and police reform. She used her platform to push for change, speaking at rallies and working with community leaders to draft new policies. But the fight took its toll. There were nights when she sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the battle pressing down on her. Marcus was always a phone call away, his unwavering support a lifeline. One evening, as she looked out over the city, Ana allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had fought the system and won, but the scars of the battle would remain. Still, she knew she couldn't stop. The fight for justice was ongoing, and she was determined to see it through. The verdict against Detective Harris sent shockwaves through the city. News outlets splashed headlines that read, "Justice served, federal judge takes down corrupt precinct." Protests grew larger, louder, demanding accountability not just from Harris, but from every corner of the system that had protected him for so long. Ana, however, knew that a single victory was not enough. She sat in her office late one evening, the glow of her desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Papers were spread before her, reports of misconduct cases that mirrored her own. Each story told the same tale, power unchecked, lives ruined. She felt the weight of them all pressing on her chest. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Marcus. "Turn on the news," he said, his voice low. Ana grabbed the remote and flipped to a local channel. The screen showed a group of protesters marching through the streets, their signs bearing her name alongside slogans for justice. But the camera quickly cut to another scene, masked individuals smashing windows and setting fire to a police vehicle. The anchor's voice was grave as they described the chaos. "They're twisting the narrative," Marcus said. "They're trying to make you the scapegoat." Ana's stomach tightened. She had anticipated backlash, but this was an escalation she hadn't prepared for. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels's life was unraveling. Since testifying against Harris, he had been ostracized by his colleagues. At the precinct, conversations fell silent when he entered a room. His locker had been vandalized, its door hanging askew with the word traitor scrawled across it in red spray paint. The whispers followed him everywhere, growing louder and more malicious with each passing day. One evening, as Daniels walked to his car in the precinct lot, he noticed a group of officers gathered near the exit. They didn't speak, but their stares were heavy, their intentions clear. Daniels kept his head down, gripping his keys tightly as he slipped into his car and drove away. When he got home, he found an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled in bold, jagged letters, "You'll regret this." Daniels called Marcus immediately. His voice shook as he recounted the threats. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "They're going to destroy me." Marcus's tone was firm. "You did the right thing, Daniels. Don't let them intimidate you. We'll protect you." But Daniels wasn't convinced. His role as a whistleblower had turned his life into a nightmare, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could endure it. From the confines of his lawyer's office, Harris watched the news with a scowl. His once proud career had been reduced to ash, and Ana Cortez had become the face of his downfall. But Harris wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. "She thinks she's untouchable," he muttered, pacing the room. His lawyer, a shrewd woman with icy blue eyes, raised an eyebrow. "She's made powerful enemies," the lawyer said. "But she also has allies. Attacking her now would be unwise." Harris ignored her warning. His mind was already turning over possibilities. He still had friends in the precinct, officers who resented Ana as much as he did. He would bide his time, wait for the perfect moment to strike. For Ana, the threats were growing harder to ignore. Emails laced with venomous language flooded her inbox. Protesters supporting Harris began appearing outside the courthouse, their signs accusing her of corruption, arrogance, and overreach. One evening, as she left the courthouse, she noticed a car following her. It stayed a few lengths back, its headlights dim, but it matched her turns with precision. Ana's heart pounded as she drove toward the nearest police station, only to see the car veer off before she reached the entrance. She called Marcus as soon as she got home. "They're watching me," she said, her voice steady but strained. Marcus didn't hesitate. "You need protection. I'll hire private security." "No," Ana said firmly. "If I show fear, they win." "This isn't about fear, Ana," Marcus said, his tone softening. "It's about survival." Reluctantly, she agreed. As Marcus dug deeper into the precinct's records, he discovered that Harris's misconduct was only the tip of the iceberg. The files Daniels had provided hinted at a network of corruption that extended far beyond one precinct. Promotions granted in exchange for silence, evidence tampered with to protect influential figures. and cases of police brutality systematically buried. Marcus brought the findings to Ana late one night. "This isn't just about Harris," he said, laying the documents on her desk. "This is a web, and it's massive." Ana stared at the papers, her mind racing. The scale of the corruption was staggering. Taking down Harris had been a victory, but this was a war. "We can't let this stand," she said, determination hardening her voice. Marcus nodded. "But if we go after this, we're painting even bigger targets on our backs." Ana met his gaze. "Then we aim carefully. We don't miss." Harris's allies within the department began to mobilize. They knew that Ana and Marcus were digging deeper, and they weren't about to let their secrets come to light. Anonymous sources began leaking falsified documents to the press, accusing Ana of bias in her rulings and misconduct on the bench. The stories gained traction, amplified by social media and opinion pieces that framed her as a dangerous figure, drunk on power. Ana fought back with facts, but the tide of public opinion was fickle, and the noise was deafening. At the same time, Marcus's office was broken into. Files were stolen, his computer wiped clean. It was a clear warning, but Marcus refused to back down. "We're getting close," he told Ana. They wouldn't be doing this if they weren't afraid. As the tension reached its peak, Ana and Marcus made their move. They held a press conference revealing the full extent of the corruption they had uncovered. Names, dates, and evidence were laid bare for the world to see. The fallout was immediate and explosive. High-ranking officials were forced to resign. Several officers were indicted. The city's mayor, who had turned a blind eye to the corruption, announced sweeping reforms. But the victory came at a cost. Ana's career, though vindicated, was forever changed. She had become a polarizing figure, loved by some and loathed by others. The threats continued, but she refused to back down. "This is bigger than me," she said in an interview. "This is about justice." And justice doesn't stop. Months later, Ana stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching as a group of young law students filed inside. One of them stopped to greet her, their eyes wide with admiration. "Judge Cortez," they said. "You're the reason I'm here." Ana smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through her usual stoicism. "Then make it count." As the student hurried away, Ana turned her gaze to the city skyline. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt hope. The system was flawed, but it could be changed, and she was ready to lead that change, no matter the cost. The dust of public exposure had barely settled when Ana received an unexpected summons from a federal oversight committee. The invitation was framed as a recognition of her efforts to expose corruption, but Ana's instincts told her otherwise. These things were rarely what they seemed. The meeting was held in a cavernous government building, its walls lined with portraits of men, mostly men, who had held power over the years. The air was sterile, heavy with history and formality. Ana sat at the end of a long mahogany table, her every move scrutinized by a panel of officials. One of them, a sharp-eyed man with a clipped voice, leaned forward. "Judge Cortez, your actions have certainly captured the nation's attention, but we have concerns that your methods have ... compromised the judiciary's reputation." Ana's back straightened. She had expected this line of questioning. "Exposing corruption and ensuring accountability are not compromises," she said calmly. "They're the very foundation of justice." The man exchanged glances with his colleagues. Another member of the panel, a woman with a severe expression, spoke up. "Justice requires balance, Judge Cortez. The perception that a judge is overly involved in political matters could, with respect," Ana interrupted, her tone sharp but controlled. "Justice requires courage. Corruption thrives on silence. What I did wasn't political, it was necessary." The tension in the room was palpable. When the meeting adjourned, Ana walked out with her head held high. But she knew this wasn't the end. The establishment wasn't used to people like her shaking their foundations, and they weren't going to make it easy for her. Officer Daniels was spiraling. The pressure from his colleagues had turned to outright hostility. His apartment had been broken into twice, his car keyed, and anonymous notes continued to appear on his door. Every time he filed a report, it seemed to vanish into the void. One evening, as Daniels sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, his phone buzzed. The number was blocked. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. A voice distorted by a voice modulator crackled on the other end. "Drop your testimony. Leave the city. This is your last warning." Daniels's breath caught. He had been living in fear for weeks, but this was the first time the threat had felt so direct. He hung up, his hands shaking as he dialed Marcus. When Marcus arrived, Daniels was pacing the room, his face pale and drawn. "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "They're going to kill me." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this. We'll protect you." But Daniels wasn't convinced. He had seen what the system did to those who dared to challenge it, and as much as he admired Ana and Marcus, he wasn't sure they could shield him from the storm he had unleashed. Harris, embittered and vengeful, wasn't done with Ana. Through back channels, he contacted a shadowy figure, a man known only as Lynch, infamous for doing the dirty work of the city's elite. Lynch had ties to those who thrived in the system Ana was trying to dismantle, and he had no qualms about silencing troublemakers. "Cortez needs to go," Harris said, his voice laced with venom. "She's destroying everything." Lynch leaned back in his chair, a thin smile curling his lips. "You want her reputation ruined, or do you want her gone?" Harris hesitated, his anger warring with caution. "I want her to know she's not untouchable." Lynch's smile widened. "Consider it done." The plan began to take shape. Whisper campaigns to erode her credibility, leaks of falsified documents, and a more personal touch, making her feel vulnerable. It was a dangerous escalation, and Ana's resilience would be tested like never before. The attacks on Ana's character began subtly. An anonymous report accused her of accepting bribes in exchange for favorable rulings, a claim that was easily disproven but still managed to spark headlines. Social media lit up with trolls calling her a fraud, a liar, a hypocrite. Marcus worked tirelessly to counter the narrative, but the sheer volume of disinformation was overwhelming. "This isn't random," he told Ana during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "Someone's orchestrating this." Ana nodded, exhaustion etched into her features. "Harris, it has to be him." Marcus frowned. "He's not smart enough to pull this off alone. He's got help." Ana's stomach turned. If Harris was working with someone more powerful, the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. The pressure was relentless. Protesters gathered outside Ana's apartment building, their chants echoing through the night. Her private security detail had intercepted 2 suspicious packages sent to her office, one containing a hateful letter, the other a dead rat. Marcus pleaded with her to step back, to let someone else take the lead in the fight. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, his voice heavy with concern, but Ana shook her head. "If I step back now, they win. And it's not just about me, Marcus. It's about everyone who's ever been silenced or dismissed." Marcus didn't argue. He knew her well enough to understand that she wouldn't back down, no matter the cost. Amid the chaos, a surprising ally emerged. A high-ranking official within the city's Justice Department, known for their integrity, reached out to Ana. Deputy Commissioner Evelyn Reed had watched the events unfold from the sidelines, and she was ready to take a stand. "I've seen the files you've uncovered," Reed said during a private meeting with Ana and Marcus. "The corruption runs deeper than you know, but I can help you." Reed's involvement changed the game. With her access to internal documents and her willingness to testify, Ana and Marcus gained the upper hand. Together, they began piecing together the web of corruption that stretched from the precincts to the city's highest offices. The culmination of their efforts came in the form of a citywide investigation. Reed's testimony, combined with Daniels's courage and the mountains of evidence Marcus had gathered, painted a damning picture of systemic rot. Harris, Lynch, and several high-ranking officials were arrested. The city's leadership was forced to reckon with the failures that had allowed such corruption to thrive. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. Ana's career as a judge was forever changed. She had become a symbol of resistance, a lightning rod for both praise and criticism. But she knew she had made a difference. Months later, Ana stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd of supporters. Her voice was strong, her words clear. "This is not the end," she said. "Justice is a journey, not a destination, and together we will continue to fight for what is right." As the crowd erupted in applause, Ana felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed they could win.